There's a circle of moving blue dots and triangles sort of circumscribed by these 3 yellow dots. And if you focus in the middle of that triangle and let those dots swirl around, you'll start to notice that the yellow spots wink out. And it's not because they're not there, they are still there, but your brain doesn't perceive them because it's busy paying attention to the motion of the blue dots around it.
Another thing that comes out is that of all the things that are constantly impinging on our sense organs, so be it the skin, the smell, vision, hearing, and so on, imagine every single one of those millions of receptors are constantly being bombarded by signals, but we're not aware of them. And indeed, we only become aware of things when we pay attention to them or concentrate on them.
Our plasticity in how we perceive the world, our visual experience in our environment, exists at many levels. So it exists at the level of perception and our ability to identify or detect things around us. But it also exists in terms of our attention and our memory of our visual world. So one thing we're trying to do now is understand how the different aspects of plasticity and all these different levels, perception, attention, and memory, all come together. And at what level we can have the most impact to really help people's abilities.
Harnessing our attention and utilizing the powerful process of plasticity with our brains can increase our ability to operate in the world and enrich and enliven us. When we come back, we'll examine just how our senses age and how science is finding new ways to integrate the different levels of perception, attention, and memory to maintain our independence and ourselves. As we age, our bodies and our brains slow, and we see and hear and feel less. The quality of the information that we receive from our senses deteriorates. Older brains are constantly struggling to reconstruct the details. Sharpened senses are one of the most important components to positive aging.
Our vision does decline. You know, for instance, in vision, you need 20 times more light to see at night by age 40 to see as well as you did at age 20 on the road. So when next time you're driving down the highway at night, don't curse the highway department for not painting the lines. The lines are just fine. It's your vision that may be the problem. With hearing, for instance, do you know that research done by the folks who design digital hearing aids and on a cutting edge of acoustical technology know very well that most of us will go 10 years without a hearing aid, longer than we actually needed it. But in those 10 years, we've actually rewired our brain not to hear or not to hear well. So it's not just about missing the conversation. We're actually starting to rewire how we think and how we hear and how we interact with the world.
Vision is particularly important because it basically constitutes the basis of our ongoing interpretation of the world. Of course, it's also extremely important that we be able to engage in the real world as accurate receivers of information from listening. So in their operations in fast time, an older brain, an older individual is very limited in the information they gather about the world. And of course they remember it more poorly. Of course they operate it with less fidelity, with less ability. Because it's not just seeing what's happening in the world, but it's responding to it. It's reacting to it, and react to it with our physical body.
We can see physical manifestations of time on our physical body, wrinkles, perhaps graying hair. But our sensory inputs age in a more subtle way.
With aging, that decline tends to be subtle. We cope. So for instance, without getting our glasses fixed over time, holding, as I do with my BlackBerry, further and further away, is a coping strategy that's actually changing how I relate to the technology, how I changed everything, and actually changing how I may actually perceive a lot of the world. If you don't take care of your hearing, slowly what you're doing is you're retraining both your social interaction with the world as well as your brain of how you interact with other people. Nodding when you didn't hear it in the first place, only picking up certain words, or not saying things when you should because you weren't quite sure you heard the intonation correctly.
And to the aging eye, these changes manifest in differences of color and light. Once again, artists proved to be a valuable study group. Impressionist Claude Monet spent almost his entire career painting outside, much to the detriment of his eyes.
All this time outdoors probably accelerated what happens in all of our eyes. Namely, by being outdoors, he got more than the usual cumulative dose of optical radiation, particularly ultraviolet light.
By the time Monet was 68 years old, he had difficulty seeing in bright light and painting objects with bright backgrounds. He was developing cataracts.
Following the cataract surgery, he now complained that everything seen through one eye with the remaining cataract appeared to yellow, and everything seen through the other eye with the cataract removed appeared to blue. And most people will tell you that following the cataract surgery, the world appears brighter and bluer. Over time, the visual system doesn't just adapt to it, as in the sense of tuning it out and ignoring it. The visual system actually recalibrates itself, so things appear differently.
And as the quality of sensory input to the brain declines, the power of predictive thinking, which served us well in our youth, can also send us down a dangerous path.
On the basis of its prediction, it's basically trying to, in a sense, help you, lead you down the path to the next predicted thing. Ultimately, even this powerful ability to abstract and predict can fail you. And it's really important that you improve the accuracy in which you take in information again and represent it in your brain, because that will help you sustain your ability to make accurate predictions.
Broadening that window of attention and increasing the speed at which we process information dramatically impacts our interaction with the world around us.
Finding things in the world, finding things on a shelf, even finding someone's name in a phone book, being able to use an ATM machine, being able to go on the phone and getting this menuing system. And all of these types of things are improved as you improve the speed of processing information.
There's some indications that the accuracy of the saccade changes as well. So when we move from one place to another, we overshoot that. And we have what's called corrective saccades, or small saccades, to transfer our attentional focus back where we want it. So we might be looking at a picture, an object, or a word, and an older adult is more likely than a younger adult to go back and look at that information again.
As the older you get, the more and more you're looking as if you have blinders on, the more and more difficult it is for you actually to identify and operate and respond to anything that's occurring away from the center of gaze or the center of your visual world.
Nowhere is this decline in processing more apparent than in our useful field of view. Useful field of view. It's a term that describes just how much interpretable information a person can absorb during one brief glance. As we age, the amount of information that we can gather from our useful field of view decreases.
Like many aspects of life, we're gradually contracting the world that we're dealing with and its complexities to simplify it by negative plasticity. One of the things that's happening is we're moving our eyes much less aggressively. On the basis of that, we're getting much less practice in our brain in making decisions about what's happening out here. We're becoming weaker and weaker at responding to things. So all of these abilities are weakening basically because our operations of the dynamics of how we're sampling information in the world are slowly deteriorating.
As we age, we think the whole world has gotten quicker, or everything's moving faster, and we tend to attribute it externally rather than what's going on within us.
Part of our useful field of view absorbs not only what we see directly in front of us, but what we observe in our peripheral vision, a critical component in the task of driving.
We know that as drivers are engaged in different cognitive tasks, they perceive the world differently. They limit off portions of their peripheral visual field. The useful field of view we know declines with age. The brain limits the amount of information flow through the eyes. And it does that by allowing me to focus on the primary area I'm interested in, but chopping off more of the areas in the peripheral visual field.
We live in a high-speed world, and it's really important that we see things in our